Thanks for joining us for Pact. P is for Peter. That's me. This is Miss Astronaut Cowboy Doctor, ACD. If you're interested in supporting us, follow or subscribe to the channel. We archive these streams for patrons, so become one today at patreon.com/PeterCoffin. We stream Fridays at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thanks a ton for tuning in. We talk about electoral politics a lot on this stream/show, and a lot of the time what we're talking about is how it is not really useful for the stated purposes of the quote-unquote left. And this often gets us questions. I'll read a very specific one for you right now. So, while I agree with a lot of what was said in this video, there's one thing I don't really understand. And I haven't understood it in a lot of previous videos either. What's wrong with using a platform to engage in electoral politics? I think that a person can be active in promoting radical changes, but also want to work within the system we have right now. I don't think this has to be an either-or scenario. We can work to get a complete asshole who refuses to even consider climate change a threat out of office, while also working to organize our labor forces. The single thing that Nat said about eating floor tiles seemed a bit ridiculous. This is talking about the ContraPoints voting video, and which I've been critical of basically every time we talk about electoral politics.
Because it's horrible.
The single thing Nat said about eating floor tiles seemed a bit ridiculous. Hyperbolic comment someone put out, uses ridiculous scenarios in her work all the time. This is the same person who pours milk all over mannequins in her videos. What about that comment makes you come back to it again and again? I appreciate your work. By the way, I don't mean to sound dismissive at all. This is just a pattern I've noticed and legitimately am curious as to your thoughts behind it.
We don't think that there's anything wrong using a platform to engage in electoral politics. What the problem is using that platform to conflate using electoral politics as something effective without, of course, the pressure of organized movement outside of electoral politics.
Do I want Medicare for all? Yes. To get that, we would need to engage in electoral politics as well as labor organizing. Like, you need both categorically in order to achieve something like that. You cannot achieve that without organizing labor and withholding labor because they have no incentive to do shit like that.
Right. Yeah. So even the electoral initiatives that we want, we can't have. Even the most self-proclaimed progressive person in Congress wouldn't use her leverage to at least do the thing that liberals are usually so great at, which is symbolic gesturing. She couldn't even do that.
You're referring to the force the vote thing. Yeah. Just to quickly recap that, there was a movement to get AOC and the squad to withhold their votes for Nancy Pelosi unless she allowed a floor vote on Medicare for all, which would have probably not given us Medicare for all, just to be clear.
No, it definitely wouldn't have. And the reason for that is because the ineffective structure that is electoral politics and quickly, or not even quickly, even within a lifetime, enacting meaningful change.
To talk about electoral politics today, we kind of want to get into the Equality Act, which is a law that passed a couple days ago in the House, which updates a lot of the language in a few different laws that have been passed in order to sort of level the playing field for marginalized groups in the United States.
Most of the language is refocused on sexual and gender minority groups. Most of it is revisions of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. I can't remember if you said that. There are some government employee rights acts that have been with the language slightly modified. Nothing fundamentally changes in this. It's really just expanding words, which is a good thing. What they have done is good because it makes it less equivocal what falls under the purview of these different acts and laws, which is excellent.
Yes.
I have a feeling that people are going to say, wow, the Biden administration's so progressive. They put out the Equality Act, which advocates for equity across racial, economic, sexual, gender hierarchies all across the board. And it's really just including more inclusive terms about sexual and gender minorities.
That is a good thing, obviously. These laws very specifically guarantee like anti-discrimination in housing and credit, like the Fair Credit Act is modified a little bit. The Housing Act is modified a little bit. But there is a big problem in that simply having laws on the books does not mean that they are enforced.
Yeah.
A good example of the problem with simply like putting equality in laws and that's it. We've got equality. The example that I want to bring up is redlining. Like in terms of these laws specifically that are being modified, there are pieces of language in them that should, for all intents and purposes, make redlining totally illegal. Which redlining is basically the ability to deny housing, deny credit, et cetera, to group a certain group into a certain area. Traditionally, if you look into Baltimore or Philadelphia, it's Black people.
Right. And then even from that perspective, making prospective or future redlining illegal, there is nothing in it to remediate the effects of that.
Exactly.
Over the past several decades, especially in the 20th century, we are so residentially segregated. So those things don't just go away by making it a law that, you can't discriminate. These are systemic issues. And people confuse systemic with legal.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think people, like a liberal might see this and think, because like the system of the government is doing this, that means it's systemic. That's not what systemic means.
No.
Systemic means that it's embedded within the architecture of the socioeconomic production mode of labor, mode of operation, culture of society. And making discrimination more explicitly unconstitutional is good. I am in no way against this, obviously. All that being said, it doesn't really change anything except for make sure that the language is more explicit about things that it has already indicated in these acts. But it does not reverse the legacy of residential segregation or of white flight or gentrification effects. It doesn't affect the resulting educational disparities and thus perpetuating the gross wealth inequity. I mean, yes, income inequity, but also wealth inequity across racial lines, racial ethnic lines in the U.S. They're aesthetic changes, but they're not meaningful. That's sort of a light but not really. But they're not useless. But they do not actively target the systemic inequities that we see. In this case, I want to say specifically across sexual and gender minority lines, because that's what most of the adjustments are focused on. This is obviously a modification of the Civil Rights 1964 Act. There's really absolutely nothing that changes to remediate the effects of racialized legacy and current racism in the U.S., which I think is a much more systemically embedded problem, because it is.
These laws are already on the books, and they haven't resolved the inequities that they intend to resolve, or ostensibly intend to resolve, because this is a system that is built on inequities. It is entirely baked in. You cannot have capitalism without inequities. The accumulation of wealth cannot happen in a situation where inequities don't exist. Like, the accumulation of wealth is itself an inequity. And when you have built all of the wealth in the country in a racialized manner, that is baked in to the accumulation of wealth.
The main adjustments in this are to focus on more explicitly making discrimination across forms unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. The 13th Amendment was also the abolition of slavery. You know what we still have in the United States, like a lot? It's slavery.
It's slavery.
The incarcerated population, our migrant farm worker population, especially among individuals who are undocumented, that's That's not even me being like dramatic, like, oh, this is slavery. I'm not even talking about like wage slavery.
You're talking about legal slavery.
Yeah.
Prisoners, migrants. There's also illegal slavery, which, unless you actually do something about that too, there's still slavery. Again, that comes down to enforcement. What do we do to stop establishments from doing that? If you see a construction site in the United States today, there's a chance that there are illegal slaves doing labor there. Like there is human trafficking. Where people buy and sell human beings still in the way that we know traditional slavery as. That still exists. And it is illegal. You cannot do that by legal standards, and yet it still exists. So why does that happen? Well, it's because we live in a system in which there is an incentive to have cheap labor. Or, in this case, basically free labor, one-time fee labor. Enough talking about the specifics of the Equality Act. Why does this demonstrate the limitations of electoral politics specifically?
I really liked your as seen on TV, like, now enough of talking about this. Yeah. Here's this.
The limitation I would put forward personally is that the state exists to maintain class differences. And therefore, if you actually wanted to get rid of inequality, including racialized inequality, because it is often expressed along class lines, that is antithetical to the state. Mm-hmm. What is wrong with using a platform to engage in electoral politics? Nothing is wrong with engaging in electoral politics.
They would never said that in any of our videos.
No.
I think, and I appreciate this person bringing forward thirst for knowledge and understanding. I feel like we've been pretty explicit about this.
Yeah.
Though. Peter has done like so much local work and like city level and state level work on their own, like for this specific reason of enacting effective reform.
Ballot measures, specifically in Michigan. I was part of the Voters Not Politicians campaign to end partisan gerrymandering in the state of Michigan, which we were successful in doing. Does that fix the voting problems in the state of Michigan? Nope.
You would never engage in something like that at an intellectually honest level for a long period of time and come out saying, wow, I did it.
Yeah, exactly. Fucking exactly. Again, we just talked about it.
But still, good that you did it.
It's still, it's fine.
Again,
it's great.
It's reform, but it's not revolution.
And
I'm tired of people conflating the two.
Yes.
You can do both things. Just don't call an apple an orange.
And this is the other thing. Like, we have to organize labor. How are you going to best organize labor? You're probably going to best organize labor along things that specifically benefit labor. For instance, we would probably have an easier time organizing labor over minimum wage stuff, over Medicare for all, over COVID payments. Why aren't we organizing labor to get that shit? Why aren't we withholding labor to get COVID payments? You would do that stuff to get labor organized. Once you have labor organized, why the fuck stop there? Like, get it into people's heads that they can do things that force the hands of people of power.
As Blaster 4000.
Yes.
Never stop pumping.